Welcome. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kevin Johnson. I am the statewide CT coordinator for health science and transportation and distribution at the Texas Education Agency here in Austin, Texas, and your host for today's webinar. This webinar is one of a series focused on planning for a COVID-19 impacted school year. We're looking at the school year through the lens of ACTE's High Quality CTE Program and Study Framework. Today's topic is access and equity. I believe we can all agree that it's an important and timely topic. We know that many of you on this webinar today are grappling with how to provide a more equitable learning environment for each and every student, even as the learning environment has been dramatically altered. We hope to identify some solutions today that will help you in that effort. In addition to today's webinar, I want to share that ACTE released a COVID-19 guide last week. I encourage everyone to take a look at it as you prepare for the new fall semester. It is a great resource, and you can find it on the same webpage where the webinars are being promoted. Also, let me convey how appreciative we are for our teachers, administrators, counselors, and countless others who are working to support students during this challenging time. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you do every day. So let's go through a few announcements. I would like to thank our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. I will introduce them in one moment, but first, a few directions. Let's take care of a little housekeeping about how we will conduct the meeting and how you can interact with us today. First, you may notice that we are using Zoom webinar. There are a few features I would like to explain. We will begin by using the Q&A feature for questions. The microphone, participant video, and chat features have all been disabled. Please type your questions into the Q&A box. We strongly encourage you to share your questions and resources throughout the presentation. We want this to be an educational environment, a give and take. We also encourage you as attendees to share answers to the questions that are being asked to the panelists. Our panelists and ACTE staff will be doing the same. This is a great opportunity to learn from each other. Again, let's make this a learning environment. If you are experiencing technical challenges or difficulties, please use the raise your hand feature in the participants box. Someone on ACTE staff will respond to help you. Next, I would like to ask Alicia Heislop, ACTE Senior Director of Public Policy, to provide a few opening remarks about ACTE's High Quality CTE Program and Study Framework, which this webinar and the entire series is built upon. Alicia?
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks everybody for joining us here today for this discussion on one of the most critical topics in planning for a COVID-19 impacted school year, and that is access and equity. I'm going to provide just a little bit of framing around our high quality framework before we dive into the discussion. If you haven't seen ACTE's framework before, it originally consisted of 12 elements that make up a high quality CTE program of study, ranging from the foundation on which the curriculum is built and the instruction in the classroom, to more what we might consider CTE specific type activities like CTSOs and work-based learning within our programs. Access and equity is one of those 12 original elements, but really cuts across all 12. Each of the webinars we've had has included some aspect of this topic as well. And if you access the guide that Kevin mentioned at the very beginning, it will have an access and equity call out in each of the sections of the guide. So if you're looking at materials around your facilities, equipment, and technology in this environment, there's a call out to access and equity considerations there as well, because we recognize that it overlaps each of these elements. The original 12 were released in 2018, and then we added one more, system supports, which are the underlying policies and funding that make it all work, which is why we now have 13 elements. The access and equity element in particular, you'll see all of the criteria that are included under it in the original framework on this slide. I won't read each of them, but you'll notice those connections to other elements. It starts at the top with how we recruit students to programs and promote our programs, and how we ensure that particularly underrepresented students have access to CTE programs. Then moves into some of those other elements, like the career guidance and career development we offer to students, the facilities and our buildings and the physical aspects of our programs, the curriculum, instruction, and materials that are used in the classroom, how we support students, providing academic supports, financial supports, additional opportunities for students who need them. And then looking at eliminating barriers to extended learning experiences. We know that that's a tremendous equity challenge within CTE programs, is ensuring that all students have access to things like work-based learning and CTSO participation and articulated credit. And those barriers can exist for a wide variety of reasons, ranging from students in rural areas having less access to low-income students or students with disabilities not having access to those activities. So those are the types of things that programs would be looking at under this element within our framework. And I'm sure you can see in each one of these, as we think about remote instruction or socially distant instruction, or helping students deal with the physical and emotional and financial effects of COVID-19, where there are equity and access issues in all of these aspects of programs that we need to be thinking about. So with that, I will turn it back over to Kevin to introduce our speakers and dig into all these issues.
Thank you, Alicia. For those of you not familiar with ACTE's high quality framework, I urge you to take a look at it and the growing number of resources that ACT has made available on the ACTE website at acteonline.org. Now to our distinguished panelists. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. John Graft is Superintendent, CEO of Butler Tech in Fairfield Township, Ohio. AcQueena Grant is Director of Communications and Outreach for the Louisiana Community and Technical College System, housed or headquartered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Amanda Bastoni is an educational scientist with the Center for Applied Special Technology, also known as CAST, in Wakefield, Massachusetts. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining to share your knowledge and experience with us today. So now let's get into our questions. So our opening question, I would like to ask each of you the following, but we'll begin with Amanda. As you begin looking ahead to your summer and fall, what is the current situation on your campus or in your state or school district? Have you reopened to serving any students in person this summer? Have decisions been made about offering in-person, blended, or remote learning for the fall semester?
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm really happy to be here. I have a little bit of a different answer than I think our other panelists, only because CAST is a national education nonprofit. So we do work in states, obviously, across the country. Although I was a CTE teacher and a CTE director previously. So, I wanted to weigh in a little bit on what Massachusetts and New Hampshire are doing. I live in New Hampshire. That's where my son goes to school. And then obviously I'm based in Massachusetts. So, in New Hampshire, they convened a task force, which I thought was great, and included CTE members on that task force. They also took a survey, the DOE did a survey of 55,000 respondents, and the majority wanted to return or would like to return to school in the fall, with some concerns, obviously, about the practicality of social distancing within a school, right? However, in Massachusetts, many of you might know, but there was a poll done and the majority were not excited about going to school or had reservations about going back to school physically. And in Massachusetts, students are going to be required to wear masks. Teachers will have to wear masks, second grade and up. And it is going to be required that social distancing is kept, recommended 6 feet, ideally mandated 3 feet at least. And students will have to eat in their classrooms and not move around in large groups. So I guess suffice to say, like, there isn't a real, from my perspective, there isn't a collective decision about how schools are going to return. And I think it really matters if you're in an urban or in a rural area.
Thank you, Amanda. John, would you like to contribute to the question?
Yes, Kevin, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today. My name is John Graft. I'm the Superintendent CEO of Butler Tech. We're in Southwest Ohio. Just to give you some context to answer the first question, we have 6 campuses that do a variety of programming, from our bioscience campus to a natural science center to traditional career tech programming, as well as a public safety complex. We have adult education students as well as high school students. And then we run satellite programs for 11 associate school districts. So we have a little bit of a variety of, when you say opening, how we're going to open and what we've done over the period of the summer. So our adult education campuses actually reopened about the middle of June. We did practice the social distancing as has been recommended, requiring our students to wear masks and our teaching staff to wear masks. We were in the middle of closing out our high school campuses, and so we were trying to navigate how we return laptops, how we return equipment, and then how students finish their credentials, which we were left sort of in a quandary, because many of our students went into the workforce and stayed in the workforce because they actually became essential workers. So we had to work through that process as well. So our summer school programming has started. It is 100% fully online, but we're anticipating and actually just announced today that our high school programs next year, we will be going back in August to our 5-day week programming, obviously honoring the social distancing and doing everything we can to make sure we're protecting both our students and our staff during the process. So it is a dynamic time. So that's as of today. 3 hours from now, it might change and probably will change. So we have a 3-tier plan to be fully back 100%, or we'll do a hybrid in which we'll do some in class and some online, and then we have another option in which we'll do full remote.
Thank you, John. Ms. AcQueena?
So yes, some of LCTCS's campuses were open this summer with modified schedules. Our students, of course, utilized social distancing. They were required to wear masks, and also it was small modified schedules and small class sizes. But definitely those students that needed to come in and do their lab components were welcome on the campuses this summer.
So let's go on to question 2 for the panel. This spring, as educational institutions transitioned to remote learning, equity issues were front and center. What are your biggest takeaways related to how these issues were addressed and the implications they hold for returning to classes in the fall? And we've all heard the term COVID slide. How are your institution dealing with that? And we'll start off question 2 with Ms. AcQueena.
So my biggest takeaways were twofold. Coming from the for-profit side of education and transferring to the traditional side of education, I had the opportunity to see, how our schools were able to pivot, and move to an online environment versus speaking with my colleagues that are still on the other side. It was business as usual, right? So it was really eye-opening for me to see, how our educators were able to pivot on a dime and stand up online classes and, get those resources readily available for our students, as well as work with other state agencies to ensure that our students' needs were being met and that we were meeting the needs of the workforce. So for example, one of the things that our Department of Nursing did was we worked with the Louisiana Louisiana State Board of Nursing to fast track over 100 graduates. And so they were able to get a temporary license and get to work. And so, that was really, a great moment for LCTCS in this, during the pandemic. The other thing for me was the amount of resources that students, needed. Learning that our students in rural areas were really affected by this. LCTCS was able to establish a relief and recovery fund. And so we were able to work with our business and development partners and provide laptops and tablets for those students that needed those resources that were impacted the most. So those are my two biggest takeaways, learning, how many students actually, didn't have, internet access, and that they relied on, coming to campus to do their schoolwork.
Amanda, would you like to jump in on question 2?
So Kevin, I was thinking about this question. I was thinking there's 3 real takeaways that I've noticed. Number 1 being, I think we need to look at how we involve parents. I think the experience of COVID-19, parents became even more critical, and in some ways they were our co-teachers. And, I hope that as we return to the classroom or whatever kind of, learning environment we return to, we really think about how we can embrace the role that parents played, and how can we make sure that parents are integrated as allies in this learning. I think maybe that's putting a positive spin on it, but I do think parents took on a new role. And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking maybe ahead of time we could send surveys home to see what tools students would have access to, or parents could weigh in on the barriers they saw their students experiencing. So just number 1 takeaway, we got to involve parents more, and we need to support parents more. My second takeaway would be that CTE educators need our support. So we all know that CTE educators, majority of them come from industry, right? So not the same pedagogical background or knowledge maybe as traditional teachers. And because of that, I think that CTE teachers report to us at CAST that they really could use assistance around supporting our special population students, especially our English learners and our students with disabilities. So when I think about remote learning, I think our CTE teachers need help and need some support in teaching online, right? And learning what strategies are good to teach online, and they need online resources. So I would recommend that we link to Skills Commons. Skills Commons is an OER, open educational resource for CTE educators. You can use it. Represents a $1.9 billion investment from the Department of Labor. So I'll throw that in the chat for everybody. It's a great resource. Skills Commons also has classes that CTE teachers can take to get better at remote learning and teaching online, that kind of thing. So that's available. And then I would say administrators help CTE teachers. Help all teachers, but help CTE teachers really set parameters. I know, my husband was a CTE teacher and he was working late at night answering emails. So just help our educators set parameters so that they can be the best educators they can be when they're on. And the last thing I'll just say is we really need to look at how we use video, Kevin. I think, it was never good teaching practice to require students to watch an 1.5 hour video and respond to it, right? And I'm not, faulting anyone, but sometimes we had to go to that when we were teaching remotely. But I did see a lot of teachers who were doing great work around making their own videos or, and being cheesy, but really getting engagement. And then another thing I saw that was really successful with video was teachers showing a professionally made video, but recording it in screencast and then weighing in and helping students know how to prioritize this information, pay attention to, don't pay attention to this, or helping them prioritize. So I think video is useful in a lot of ways because paras can watch those videos, familiarize themselves, help us. We can use, CTE teachers can use those videos that they created, if a student is absent. So, my 3 big takeaways really are involve parents, support CTE educators, and really think about how and why we're using video.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for offering those resources. Ms. AcQueena?
Okay, I'm back. Is that better? Are you
Yes, ma'am. It's perfect.
All right. So I have 2 big takeaways. So my first big takeaway, and I'll just speak to LCTCS. I've had the opportunity to work on both the for-profit side as well as now with traditional education. And so in speaking with my former colleagues that work on the for-profit side, it was business as usual for them, because many of their classes were already offered online. However, in this space, we had to pivot on a dime and stand classes up that weren't normally offered online. And so just, hats off to those educators that were able to do that, and their resilience, and also work with other agencies. So one of the other things that LCTCS was able to do was we worked with Louisiana Board of Nursing to fast track over 100 graduates and get nursing students temporary nursing license so that they could go to work. And so being able to, affect those students in a positive way so that they could, become essential workers and utilize the skills that they've learned. And then as well as resources. So coming out of this, we also learned the number of students who were using on-campus resources, so computer labs. LCTCS was able to put together a recovery fund, and we were able to purchase laptops and tablets for students. So that was huge for me to realize the number of students that were dependent on our campuses to do their work. And so it was really great that we were able to, most of our campuses were able to utilize funds from our recovery relief fund so that we could purchase them laptops and computers. And so for the long haul going forward, for the fall, the need is going to be even greater, because this is, our summer population is much smaller than our students in the fall. So those students are going to need help as well.
Thank you, AcQueena. John?
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief and just say that, what issues, equity issues were front and center. I think for me, and not necessarily speaking about Butler Tech, but I think just about the national public education system. I think COVID-19 highlighted the inequity in the education system in general. I think there were districts that were haves and have-nots. I think there were students that had clearly under-resourced opportunities to be able to handle the shift to online learning. I mean, we were fortunate enough at Butler Tech that we've been a one-to-one school for a number of years, since 2005. So, most, if not all of our students had the opportunity and access to the online curriculum. We've been doing online curriculum, but, our 11 associate school districts didn't have that advantage. And so there were a number of students that were in marginalized populations that really didn't have opportunities that they needed to have. And so for me, it highlighted, and a resurgence for me, and to think about the responsibility that we have as educators to make sure that we standardize the opportunity and availability for everybody in this nation. And that for me was what the takeaway was. We adapted. Yes, we had 48 hours notice that we were shutting down, but we had a lot of systems already set up. But for me, the highlight was, and sadly it was a low light, that there were clearly inadequacies in structures and funding for schools to be able to handle the shift in instruction.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. So we're going to start now with you again, John. We're going to go into question 3. As the economic and health situation continues to evolve, how can educators maintain communication with learners, their families about their needs, both educationally and for services like food, housing, and transportation? Because you hear the stories where for your low or economically disadvantaged students, that in some high economically disadvantaged areas, they've lost 15 to 20% of their student population just with not being able to communicate with them. So what are some of the things that you've seen and you're doing, John? You're on mute, John.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so it definitely led me to think about this next question from what I had just previously said. The true test of the culture of your organization is during a crisis. And so if you haven't developed relationships with your students and families prior to the crisis, I think the crisis highlights your inability or your ability to serve your families and students to the best of your ability to do so. So I think our system continued to connect with our families because we had already established good relationships with our students and with our families. We utilized Zoom calls. I would say that there was probably a point in time in which we ended up with some Zoom fatigue. I know all of you who are probably participating today have, whether you've heard of Zoom or not, you're probably tired of it at this point already. But I would say that we utilized our technology to the best of our ability to continue to connect with our families and our students. And it was more than just the academics. We knew that this was a crisis and a stress for all of us. And so we were trying to figure out, what are the needs beyond the educational needs that we're always focused on as educators. But it just became to the forefront for us about what were the other needs. Academically, we did Facebook Live sessions. We provided a variety of different ways in which students could access the curriculum. We did find out that students were accessing at very different times than what they normally did. And actually, some of our students who were not as successful in the classroom actually found greater success online. And the reverse happened for students who were finding success in the classroom on a regular basis. They somewhat struggled with the online environment. So I would say being flexible, we used our online platform of Schoology to continue to do the academic piece. We maintained all of our mental health services. We have a contracted service with Lifespan, which is a local organization here. We continued to tap in there. But what we told our teachers, and we really empowered our teachers, was do what's right for your kids. Just do what's right for your kids. And if it means you need to be flexible in your academics, or you need to help them find food, or if they have become the essential worker of the home because their mom or their dad or their grandma or grandpa, whomever they live with, have been laid off, we need to understand that there's a human side of education. And that's what we focused on. And I think that boded very well for us. We had all kinds of different techniques and strategies and resources that we used. But I think really the heart of it was we went into it with our heart of being an educator and just seeing to it that we were serving our students as best we could and their families.
Thank you for sharing, John. And that's not my first time hearing that concept of Maslow's before Bloom, needs before, and you can't teach until you meet those needs. So thank you for that. Amanda, would you like to add to that question?
Yeah, I would, Kevin. In the high quality CTE planning for COVID resource that ACTE put out, I just wanted to say that Ben Williams, who's the CEO of NAEP, he said we should enter into the process in a collaborative and supportive way and check ourselves when we want to pass judgment. And I just think that speaks a lot to what John was saying he did in his district in a really, really positive way. I just wanted to weigh in on two things. I think now is the time when we go back in the fall to think about teaching students to do daily check-ins. So a lot of us will do that check-in every day because we see the students in front of us, but I think it would be wise of us to purposely design daily check-ins that are remote. So instead of just having a question of the day, maybe you have the students answer that online using Google. I think what that will do down the road is if we have to go into that hybrid learning environment again, or the remote environment, that teacher can be the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, and indicate, the student hasn't checked in. They know how to check in. I've practiced checking in with them and they haven't checked in. And the earlier we can, catch that, I think the better. And I think we saw that in COVID-19, some kids just stopped engaging. They just didn't engage for months at a time. And I would like to think, how can we start planning to prevent that? The last thing is ACTE has a blog post on using UDL, Universal Design for Learning, to design your syllabus. I think now is a great time to encourage educators to think about the syllabus in a new way. Could the syllabus become a tool that you put online that you engage with parents using, so that if we have to go into that remote environment again, or we have to, transition, we have that syllabus right there and we can use it to talk with parents, to engage parents. Kids know sort of a roadmap. Where do I go back to? A GPS, like I know, okay, even though this all changed, I have my syllabus still. I know how to interact with my teacher. So, those are just two thoughts I have in preparing for what might come next.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. And from our Q&A, thank you, Shelly, for sharing what you're doing in Arizona. Shelly brought up the fact that they did a survey and they were fortunate enough to find that only 4% of their student population indicated that they would need assistance with devices or even connection. So very good problem to have. So we're going to go ahead and move on to our next question. And we'll start with you, Amanda. How can institutions, districts ensure all students have both internet access and appropriate devices for remote learning in the event that education needs to be offered remotely, even for a short time?
Yeah, Kevin, before I answer that, I'd love to know if if AcQueena's, sound is working, maybe she could weigh in on would we be okay with her weighing in on the last question? I think that might be good.
Ms. AcQueena, you have a request from a panelist.
Sure, sure. On the last question in regards to communications?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yes, so what LCTCS has done is, and I can only speak from, the student services side, taking our student services or student affairs department and making it totally virtual. So, having virtual college fairs and virtual tours. We've also utilized Facebook Live, in addition to moving orientation to an online setting. So taking those services and, making them available for students, as well as, ensuring that we have a robust communication plan going out to all of our different populations, which is, most of my job as well. We utilize a communication software or CRM that allows us to do that in addition to texting and all of the other tools. And so it's really important that we meet students where they are. And that was our approach to this, meeting students where they are, utilizing all various mediums.
I totally couldn't agree more. Kevin, do you want me to kind of weigh in on that now that
Absolutely.
internet?
Go ahead and weigh in on number 4.
Okay.
Devices. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I do want to say too, just that after that 55,000 respondent survey in New Hampshire, they did find that 20% of the respondents said that remote learning actually reduced anxiety and stress in students. So, to John's point, which was, it wasn't necessarily a negative for all students, but I think the reason we're convening today is it was very difficult for certain segments of the population, students that didn't have access. It exacerbated inequities. So all I know is that in New Hampshire, they gave hotspots to certain students who needed them. They drove the bus around with hotspots. I know that some teachers had free cell phones donated, and that they really tried to capitalize on the relationship that teachers had with students. So I know that, my husband would have one student who just wasn't engaging. Finally, he called home and found out what that student needed. So I think my big takeaway is really lean heavily on your teachers, like what John had already suggested. Lean heavily on those relationships and try to find out as early as possible who does or who doesn't have resources.
Quick question for you, Amanda, just a follow-up. Your background, I know the question in special education, right? Students that need special services. Do you know of any strategies or any special programs that were put into place to help that student population?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to draw everyone's attention to the AIM Center. So the National Center on Accessible Materials, so that's the AIM Center, has free resources they published around COVID-19 just to help educators understand how do we ensure that resources are accessible, right? We're not just putting out a resource that doesn't work on a certain platform, or a resource that won't be understood by parents. We have to think about not only our students, but our English language learner parents, making sure that they are included in the conversation. So I would draw folks their attention to the AIM Center. And I would just kind of answer your question, Kevin, by saying that I think we learned how important our paras are as well. Really bringing that team together around a student is so essential. And so if a teacher can be that canary in the coal mine, indicating that a student is struggling or has some some extra resources they need, how do we then activate the team even in a remote learning situation? How do we engage our paras? How do we engage our our guidance counselors even, and how do we support students in that way?
Thank you, Amanda. John, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, so from a short and long-term perspective, the short term, I think everybody knows that you really had very little time to prepare. And if you didn't have structures in place, those were the districts that struggled the most. I think from a long-term perspective, we really need to have a national effort at creating these resources for all students, period. I know that there were stimulus packages to make sure that, businesses maintained their employees and their organizations, but I think that this could have been an impetus for the education systems to say, hey, there are inequities in our education system, and these are resources that students have to have in the 21st century in order to access curriculum, in order to access learning, and in order to be on a level playing field with everyone. And again, I would just reiterate that this inequity was highlighted during the pandemic. It wasn't the first time that it's occurred, because it's occurred for a long, long, long time. And for me, 97% of our students had access because we provided it. But I think that many times the single computer that we offered, the laptop that was brought home, was being shared by multiple students within the home because the other districts did not have laptops or computers for them. And for me, that's just unconscionable that we would do this in the United States, where we wouldn't be able to provide those minimum resources to access learning and opportunity for our students. So I think it needs to be a growth effort, and I think ACTE can lead in that dialogue and discussion about how we go about making this a national effort, because career tech and that pathway is really about personalized learning. It's about growing and adapting and finding how you transform your life. But you have to have those resources either through the district or providing it directly to students.
Thank you, John. And just a reminder to our participants, please share information. We're sharing information with you. Again, we want this to make an ebb and flow session of information going out to you. And if you have something you would like to share, resources, programs that you've come up with, or your innovative process for dealing with the challenges of access and equity in our troubled times at this point. So now I would like to move on to question number 5, and start with Ms. AcQueena.
Okay.
Given the challenges that many learners have faced over the past few months, how can we best support their social, emotional, and mental health needs?
One of the things that LCTCS has done is we've established a task force. And on this task force, our system-wide task force, we're also going to establish subcommittees across all of our colleges and every campus. And so what we're going to do is we'll start with a virtual forum. Actually, our student leaders are going to have a virtual forum that will give students an opportunity to join and talk about, what's going on with them and get the support that they need. After we have the virtual forum, the next thing we're going to do is also have forums on our colleges, on our campuses, across the state. And that way our students feel supported. And during those forums, we'll be sharing with them, various resources in their area, where they can go and get things, or, if they need other help outside of what we provide, because we want to make sure that students have what they need. In addition to that, we're standing up a microsite. And so we'll be communicating with students and directing them to the microsite where they can log on and also be directed to those resources.
Thank you, AcQueena. John, would you like to share on this question?
Yeah, so the social emotional needs obviously came to the forefront, I think, for, I would say, both educators and for students, because we had, multifaceted struggles, because there were teachers that had family members that were essential workers that were being exposed to COVID-19. We had students that were changing their dynamics because they were now full-fledged into the workforce, working 40 hours a week, yet trying to maintain academics. So, you know, I would say the best way we support that is, you know, we need to think about this assembly line model that we have in public education that, you know, a one size fits all for everybody. It doesn't. And I think the districts that met the challenges of meeting the needs of the students as to where they were and then providing the right resources to them at that time, you know, as AcQueena mentioned about the forums, I think those are great things, and we did those as well. It's great to provide those opportunities and resources to the students at the time they need them. We started a 5th day experience for our students, which was really about student voice before COVID-19, providing students an opportunity to know and understand and take over their own learning. What is it that they wanted to do and learn and become better at? Did they need to get a certification as an STNA, or did they want to learn about welding and happen to be in a mechatronics program? And so I think, or did they want you know, individual therapy session to talk about their goals, or had mental health needs. And so we provided a variety of those different opportunities at really trying to free up, so to speak, our control of the learning process and give students voice about what it is that they wanted to do. And I think COVID-19 pushed us even further to try to open up those resources and really listen to our students about what they wanted and needed.
Thank you, John. Amanda, would you like to add to it?
Sure, yeah, that's great, John. Thank you, AcQueena, also. So I was just thinking that, you know, we need to really, when we go back to school, remember that students experience trauma, right? And when students experience emotional disconnect, like discordance, it affects their learning, right? And we know that as educators, but I think we can't minimize that. And then I think we also need to think about how teachers also experience trauma. I mean, so did administrators, but teachers did as well. And I think it's important to model that the school system, CTE administrators model showing supports for CTE teachers so that they can show those kind of supports for CTE students. I think that's critical. And I just wanted to, you know, talk about that in personally, at the high school level, right, where most of our CTE work is happening, you know, it's happening at the community college level, but my experience is my son is in his CTE program in high school. His peer-to-peer interaction is so critical, like, right, that his brain is really ready. He wants to be with his friends. He wants to be with his peers, and not having that, you know, he had a breakdown. He cried. He was really upset. And I think we just have to remember that they missed out on a huge piece of that peer learning that is so critical at that age. So just don't underestimate that importance of it, and really try to support educators so they can support students.
Thank you, Amanda. John, we're going to start off question number 6 here. If campuses are able to reopen to serving students in person, what equity and access issues do you see as the most critical for CTE educators to attend to?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to take a little bit of a turn with this particular question, because access and equity, you know, I'm probably focusing on the equity issue. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we have, this has been a greater struggle with not only the pandemic, but the racial division in this country. And so I would say that there are tremendous opportunities for school systems and educators who have diverse populations to have better understanding about what it means to live in this country, whether you're a person of color that lives in this country or whether you're a white person. And there are different experiences that all of us are having. And so, you know, access to education is one thing about resources and providing equity in those resources. But I also think that, you know, we're talking about the whole child and the whole person as to how we build them up to be a good person and be a positive person in this world. Our students will be returning, hopefully, in person And I think there's tremendous opportunity to be able to speak to the racial divisions that have been long in our history in the United States. And I think you need to be well-versed, well-prepared, well-read, have diverse understandings and diverse populations who are sharing perspectives with one another, because there is an enlightened reality that I think hopefully persons that look like me recognize and understand. The academic piece, we have very high success rates with our students. And I think upon returning, we'll continue to have very high success rates. But, my focus really at this point of being 27 years in education is that I think there's a greater opportunity for us to do even better when it comes to the racial injustices that have occurred throughout our nation and in public education.
AcQueena, would you like to add to that?
Sure. And thank you, John, for that. In regards to making sure that everyone, has an awareness of what is going on, that's also going to be a part of our task force. It is a task force for diversity and inclusion. So that's going to be a huge part of the conversation, and not just for our students, but for our staff and faculty as well. One of the conversations that I shared recently with one of our colleges in Shreveport, Northwest Louisiana Technical College, and they were trying to decide how they were going to develop a professional development course for their instructors, for the professors, so that, going forward, they ensure that they're being sensitive, to their diverse students. And many of our colleges are minority serving institutions. And so that is definitely at the forefront of, LCTCS's current mission. And in regards to the question, our most critical needs, and again, I'm not an educator, but speaking as to our program offering and what our schools offer is really going to be about ensuring that our students are getting what they need in the hybrid environment, especially with our students that need the lab components, and they, our welding students need that. And so not just welding, but, other students that are hands-on. They, need to ensure that they're getting what they need. And so one of our colleges, has even moved those to virtual. We have, virtual simulators that they're able to, finish and get all of the hours that they need for their program. So I think that's what's most critical for our students.
Amanda, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'd love to add. I mean, I think AcQueena and John did an excellent job. I just want to weigh in that I have fears about how decisions will be made, which students get in or have access to CTE, because now we're going to see some students that will need to repeat classes or maybe failed classes or have to take them over. And is that going to limit their access to the CTE programs? And my fear about that is that like taking recess away from a student who, is really is acting out at a younger grade, because so often our CTE classes, and research shows us this, are what keeps students engaged in learning, and so by limiting their access, I really fear that we might exacerbate our dropout rates for certain populations. So, that's my fear. And then I just wanted to indicate two other things, draw your attention to two other things. I think we need to really, and maybe we don't have time today, but we need to talk about equitable assessments. We really need to talk about how we're designing assessments to be equitable. And, I'd be happy to talk more about that. But the last thing I just wanted to touch on is that in the ACTE guidelines, again, that COVID-19 planning, ACTE says educators will need to consider adjusting curriculum to account for potential learning loss. And I just would encourage administrators to help support their teachers to do this, because I think teachers are going to have a fear that if they, adjust curriculum or they don't meet all the goals, that they will, be penalized in some way. And, we can talk about why that might be. But the big picture is, can we just as administrators agree to embrace and support educators and let them know that it's, as John said earlier, student-centered. It's not about hitting these arbitrary targets or whatever.
And I think that's a great point. And John, definitely want to add, and just to to your ad, thinking of it from a tier 1, because I know a lot of what I've seen has been tier 1. What are we looking at for tier 2? And then tier 3 supports for students and what those instructional models, and have you given any thought to those aspects? Go ahead, John.
Hey, Amanda, I wanted to mention, it's interesting you talk about the enrollment and application process. We changed this a couple of years ago for our programming. We do not look at grades at all. We only make sure that students are credit proficient. We also do not look at any discipline data. We also do not look at any attendance data. They have an interview, and if we see that they have grit and desire to want to be in the program, and they can complete the program because they're not too significantly credit deficient, they're in. And
so what has been your persistence and attainment with that policy?
I'm sorry?
What has been your persistence and attainment rates with that policy?
Oh yeah, our retention rates are very, very high at keeping our students in our programs because of that. I mean, the true measure of intelligence is about integrity and grit and desire. If you know that there are inequitable assessments that define whether a student gets in or not, and you eliminate that barrier and say, look, a student's desire to want to learn and want to know and want to be a part of the program, we'll take as many students that have that grit and desire to want to succeed in a program, irrelevant of their grade point average.
John, I just want to applaud you for that approach, because I have a, you know, I think it's an issue across the country, really, and it really harms our special population students, our low-income students, our students who are moving. Right now, we've just added veterans. Right, Perkins 5 calls out students who are the children of veterans. If they're moving all the time, their attendance rates are going to be lower. How do they, you know? So I just think that's a really worthwhile approach, and I just want to applaud you for it. And also just thinking about work-based learning. So how are we going to give students access to work-based learning? I think we need to think about that now. So when I talked about videos, can we start to pull our packs together, and can we start to create like short videos with our advisory groups to give students at least a simulated experience, or have our work-based learning partners design challenges that then our students can, you know, partake in and get some of that work-based learning experience, even if we have to go remote, or students can't go in because they have to wear masks. You know, I don't know what the rules will be, right?
AcQueena, we have a question for the field. They're asking if your organization has a task force.
Yes, we do.
And they're wondering if you can share information on that task force in the chat, and we'll try to share it out to them.
Will do.
Thank you. So Amanda, and I think we've kind of gone into these a little bit. We touched on these already. And the question is about remote instruction, right? Aside from connectivity, what equity and access issues are most critical for CTE educators to address? And I think for a conversation between asynchronous and synchronous learning, right? What are the considerations for equity and access in those models?
I would say I would respond with two things, and I want to give John and AcQueena time if they want to respond too. I just want to say that we really have to think about executive functioning, and how do we support students' executive functioning. When we are supporting their executive functioning in person, it's much easier. We can see when a student's falling behind. We can, you know, help support them, come alongside them. We can indicate to a para to support them. But online, it's so much harder to support executive functioning. And I know I told this already, but instead of just sending out a video, even if it's the best, it's a Khan Academy or a really well-designed video, I really want to encourage teachers to watch the video, screencast, pause as they would in the classroom, indicate to students where they should prioritize their learning. There's simple techniques that are actually called out in UDL on campus, and I did share that link, that can help teachers support executive functioning online, because it is going to be a struggle for students to do that work. And then lastly, just that equity and assessment. So, you know, we really need to think about allowing students to have multiple ways to demonstrate they understand learning. It's a massive problem when we go to online, we're always just defaulting to writing, right? An essay, write an essay about this, you know. but that is not testing whether a student can drive a forklift. That is not testing whether a student can wire a house. That's testing how well they put grammar or vocabulary onto a page. So just really encouraging teachers to think about offering multiple ways for students to demonstrate their learning to address some of those equity issues that come up in assessments.
Thank you. AcQueena, would you like to add to that conversation?
Just in regards to assessments, so some of our institutions with LCTCS, in response to COVID, is moving away from we utilize the AccuPlacer as a placement test, and so they're moving to a self-directed test, and students are given those instructions upon admission. And I'd also just like to mention that all of our institutions are open access institutions, so there's no minimum ACT score to get into any of our colleges.
John, would like to share on the last question?
Yeah, I'll just give one example. So our state laxed a lot of the official assessments because they couldn't figure out how they were going to provide them for us. And for us, that gave us freedom. We actually did, I'll give you the example. We had our auto collision students provided a virtual showcase. We have student showcases twice a year. We learned that from High Tech High, and which they demonstrate their skills, and they invited myself and a number of other staff members to participate in a Zoom call. They took over the screen. They created their PowerPoint showing all of the aspects of what they did in rebuilding this automobile, and they showcased virtually their learning. And there are creative ways that you can provide them opportunities to showcase their skills. And then the last thing, I know I only said one, but the last thing is that our teachers did a lot of just check-ins. They did a lot of check-ins, which is, hey, I'm not here to talk with you about your grade. I'm not here to talk with you about your skills and your work. I'm here to just talk about you, what's going on with you. And I think we'll need to continue to do that throughout the year, whether we're in remote learning or whether we're re-engaging our students coming back to our campuses.
I think that's a great point, John. Connecting on a human level, right? All righty, so our last question, I think, is a pertinent question. They all have been pertinent, but just looking at the combination of all the things that are happening, right, the resulting economic issues that are related to COVID-19. Given the current economic situation and financial pressures on many students, how can CTE educators best support all learners' access to and continuation along high-quality career pathways? And we'll start with AcQueena.
Okay, so I'm glad to share with you guys what Baton Rouge Community College is doing. So again, I'll just choose one versus going down the list of what all 12 are doing. So BRCC has eliminated their non-resident fee. So I think that'll be a good financial relief for students. They've also eliminated online fees. They will be issuing institutional aid to students based on the number of credit hours that they take. So for example, the more credit hours they take, the more opportunity they have to receive, more institutional aid. And so that institutional aid is not the federal Pell Grant. That is aid that is going to be given to those students from that institution. In addition, our system also offers scholarships for students. So any students that are a part of Skills USA automatically receive an institution to all 12, a scholarship to all 12 of our institutions, as well as FFA. And so if these, I'm sorry, I know you guys probably already know that FFA is Future Farmers of America. So if they are an FFA member, again, they automatically receive this scholarship. There's no other criteria other than being a member of the organization. Same thing with Skills USA. And then if they are a gold medalist, they have an opportunity to get additional dollars, additional scholarship dollars. Or if they're a champion with FFA, they have an opportunity to get additional scholarship dollars. So that's some things that LCTCS is doing to, alleviate the financial burden on students. Oh, as well as construction pathways. So we have also a scholarship opportunity for students that are in construction pathways. So if they enroll in any construction pathways program across our colleges, they're able to apply for a scholarship.
Thank you, everyone. We're almost at our time. We're at 2:59. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you're busy educating our students, so I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and idea about this pertinent topic on access and equity. I wish you all the best as we collectively work to prepare for the 2020-2021 school year in whatever form that takes. Please remember that ACT is here to serve and support you. We hope to see many of you back here as we continue the series on COVID-19 and the high quality CTE program and study framework. We hope to continue to hear from CTE educators, administrators, school counselors, and all other professionals. I know Amanda mentioned paraprofessionals who are working to support students through this difficult time and tell us about your successes, your challenges, and needs for additional support. So again, to respect your time is exactly 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. We were scheduled for a 1-hour webinar. I wanted to say thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, John. Thanks, AcQueena. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Kevin.